Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to another CRI Cuban Research Institute event at Books and Books. My name is Sebastián Arcos. I'm the interim director for the CRI. Former director is sitting right there, Jorge Duani. It is our pleasure tonight to present yet another novel, another book by Uva de Aragón. Uva has a long history with both FIU and the Cuban Research Institute. She was born in Havana in 1944. She has authored more than a dozen books, among them the novels, both translated into English, The Memory of Silence and The Miracle of Saint Lazarus. Her first thriller with Cuban-American detective María Duquesne as the main character. De Aragón is also a renowned journalist, obtained a PhD in Latin American literature from the University of Miami. Until her retirement in 2011, she was a professor and associate director of the Cuban Research Institute at FIU. Tonight we have with her both translators of this book. Let me briefly introduce them. Jeffrey C. Barnett is the Blount Mason Professor of Romance Languages at Washington and Lee University, where he teaches courses in Spanish American literature and literary translation. In addition to Flux by Surelis Lopez Amaya, he has also translated Uva de Aragón's The Memory of Silence, and together with Kathleen Bulger-Barnett, The Miracle of Saint Lazarus. Kathleen Bulger-Barnett is Professor of Modern Languages at the Virginia Military Institute, where she teaches language and literature from Spain and Spanish American. She has also translated, together with Jeffrey C. Barnett, Uva de Aragón's The Miracle of Saint Lazarus. And now I give the floor to Uva.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin by thanking Books and Books. I don't know how many books I've launched here. I feel very much at home. I want to thank the Cuban Research Institute. I worked there for many years,
But even since I retired in 2011, they still make me feel that it's my home. I want to thank its former director, Jorge Duani, for being here when he doesn't have to, and congratulate him on his retirement. And I want to thank Sebastián Arcos, the interim director, for his introduction. He kept brief, as I like. I don't like those long introductions. And of course, I like to thank the staff of the Cuban Research Institute and of Books and Books, because I know there's a lot of work behind the scenes in these kinds of events. Unfortunately, the editor of the book, Marlene Moleón, is out of the country. Unfortunately for us, lucky for her, she's in Spain, though she cannot be here. But I want to thank her, recognize her efforts in the publication of this book. We made many changes at the end when it was almost ready, and she was very patient. And mainly I want to thank Jeffrey Barnett and Kathleen Bulger-Barnett for translating my work. This is a third of my books that they translate, and for being such great friends that they've become. We were just reminiscing. It's been since 2007 that maybe we have time, we'll tell you the story how Jeffrey found me. It's a really interesting story. But they become more than the translators of my work. They become very good friends. And last but not least, I want to thank you all for being here, in spite of the traffic and tiredness of a Friday night, other places where you could be. And of course, I'm happy to see some family and friends of all different moments of my life. And I especially want to thank those of you who do not know me and are here for the love of books, because that is so very important to me and to every writer. Now I want to tell you a little bit about why I wrote 2 detective novels and a little bit about this novel in particular. More than 10 years ago, I started having a lot of problems with my vision. That's why I have these big papers. Don't get scared, it's not many things, just has big type. And I couldn't read. I felt so embarrassed because I started reading at 9. I was always been an avid reader, and I couldn't read books. And so I started reading in Kindle. The first Kindle was given to me by Marlene Moleón in 2010. I must say that I was the first Cuban-American author to have an ebook. In 2010, The Memory of Silence came out in Spanish as an ebook. She published it as an ebook and gave me a Kindle. And so I started reading in Kindle, and I thought it wasn't serious to read in Kindle. And now I do all the time. I have a whole library in my Kindle. I underline with different colors. I make notes, and it's, you know, I enjoy it. But since I thought it wasn't serious, I started reading detective novels. I wasn't really an avid reader of detective novels. I had read some of Nancy Drew and some of Agatha Christie, but that's about it. So I discovered new authors. I had read Padura's books on Mario Conde, and I read Roberto Ampuero, the Chilean, with his Cuban detective Caetano Brulé in Valparaíso, Chile. I read the Spaniard Manuel Vázquez Montalbán and his detective Pepe Carvalho, the Italian Andrea Camilleri, who is Inspector Montalbano, which is in honor of Montalban, and the American author Donna Leone with her series about Commissario Brunetti, which takes place in Venice. And I found out that la novela negra, como dicen en España, had changed a lot, and the detective was important, was more human, it wasn't as cartoonish as in previous novels, that their family was important, that the city where it took place, where it was Valparaíso or Venice or Havana, was like a character in the novel. And another surprising thing for me is that food was important. When I read Mario Conde, I was surprised that food would be important in a place like Havana where there's hardly any food. But the mother of one of the characters made these big dinners, and then I learned that Montalban was a food critic in Barcelona, and he was the one to introduce food into his detective novel, and everybody from there on. So I said, oh, okay, I can do this. I had been retired for about 5 years. I had done other things, and I hadn't written a new book, and I felt guilty, and I started to write. So in these detective novels, the characters in my previous novels had always been about my age, but in this, they are about my daughter's age. Because I get older, the characters get younger. I mean, people my age cannot do the things that María Duquesne is, and I made it a Cuban-American detective in Miami, because you should write about things you know, it's easier. And Miami, it's a character in both novels, and I call her María Duquesne as a wink to Padura with Mario Conde. I personally thought, I'm not sure now, that I liked the first one better, but they like the second one, this one better, and a lot of readers do, so maybe you read both and let me know. It was more challenging to write this one because I had constructed a character in the first one, and I didn't know how much I should repeat that would bother a reader that would have read the first one, but how much I needed to repeat or to say differently so the character would be, you know, so I could develop the character. So it was more challenging than the first one. 5 years to the date, on October 25th, 2019, in the room on the other side, we launched the translation of the first one, The Miracle of St. Lazarus, A Mystery 20 Years in the Making, which I wasn't going to have that title, but Marlene took off with it right after I finished. I had that working title, and he just took off. A few months later, after we presented that book here in October of 19, as you know, in March of 20 was the COVID started, and I had just finished the second one, this one in Spanish, and we had a virtual presentation. I remember it was Jorge Duani and Cristina Nosti. We had a virtual presentation, so that's not as rewarding, because it's really very satisfying to this kind of book presentation. To me, I equal to a christening of a baby. It's when I always say que un libro se goza y se sufre como un parto. You know, it's just like childbirth. And Ana Menendez, one of my favorite authors, just walked in, and she'll know that it is true, that giving birth to a book, it's as painful and joyful as giving birth to a child. The previous novel, the main characters lived in Hialeah, and eran de Pinal del Rio, and there are a lot of Cubanness. I think it was very hard for the translators. We had a lot of Cuban sayings and Cubanness. But in this second one of the main families is American, and they live in well-off. They live in Coral Gables, in Coconut Grove, in Brickell, and so there's still Miami, but a little bit different of Miami. There are 2 murders that are totally, one of a wealthy lady, and one is of a Nicaraguan undocumented, and one takes place in Coral Gable, and the other one takes place in the Palace of Vizcaya. And I want to tell you as little as I can about the story itself, so you can read it. So I don't want to give much about the story. I will leave it here for now, and I will ask Professor Barnett to tell you a little bit about the translating experience, and then I will read a passage, they will read a passage, read a smaller passage at the end, and we'll open it to questions. So, Jeff, take it away.
Why don't you go first?
Kathleen? Okay.
I'll take it first. So we do this, what we call the ear test and the eye test. Once we're finished with the translation, we let it sit for a little while so we get away from it. And then we come back with our ear test and eye test, where one of us will read the Spanish out loud and the other looks at the English on the screen. And we check for accuracy to make sure, have we missed a line somewhere? Is there anything that we've added that's not there, or something that's missing? We do that first, and then we come back and we read. One reads the English out loud, and the other is looking at the text. And we look for tone. We try to make sure that the tone is consistent. We try to make sure that the tone of characters is consistent, because we just divided the chapters up. I can't remember how we did it this time. Was it, I'll take 1 through 10, you take to 20, or whatever. We want to make sure that
You said all the mistakes were mine.
That's right. Yes, any mistakes were yours.
Right.
So we want to make sure that Maria sounds the same, regardless of who translated it. That the tone is consistent, that the flow is consistent. So that was something that we spent a lot of time doing, just the ear test, eye test, and I think it works for us.
I'll try not to digress too much on theory of translation. I love to talk about translation, and in Memory of Silence, in the preface, there's a lot there about the inner workings of translation. But we've all probably, since our earliest memories, right, we're reading translated works, whether it was the Bible, Aesop's Fables. We've all been around translated works. And you don't always know if it's a good translation, but we always know when it's a bad translation, right? I mean, you can tell with the ear, something's not right here. So that's part of that ear. And part of the ear test too, is once we get to know characters, we have to make sure that their voice matches what's probably in your head, our head, right? So Kepler, Maria, Patricio, in our heads, they all have these voices. So we have to be faithful to it. So as a translator, the first thing we're always mindful of is the audience. It's not any longer Uva's text or ours, it's your text. So we have to figure out how are we going to deliver that to you. And I think probably with the last novel and this one thing that is hopeful about it is that the audience is much greater than just somebody in Coral Gables in Miami. We had in mind that this is somebody who would be reading this in an airport in Seattle. So they may not know what the Biltmore Hotel is like, right? So the first thing is with local color. That's what's so great about this novel is local color. The text should speak for itself. Second of all, what happens when the text doesn't speak for itself, and you know what uva means, but somebody who's not from Miami doesn't. So we had trouble at times, even in previous novels, right? So everybody knows here what a ventanilla is. You go up to get una colada en la ventanilla, all right? But try explaining that to somebody who's not from Miami, and there's not a great word for that. So you can say the coffee stand. If you say walk-up window, what the is that, right? So yes, there are times when we had to translate Miami. We had to translate Coral Gables. We had to translate what you know would be in the novel, what uva meant, but what is somebody from who's not from here. So that's part of the audience that we always have in mind. Translators also have to deal with subtlety. We talk about reading, we talk about dramatic irony. When you know something's about to happen, the character on stage doesn't. Well, the translator already knows. We've read the novel, right? We know that we can't give away stuff, and so we have to hold ourselves back at times. And so the translation process has to be guarded. Another problem with translation is maintaining the same subtlety, especially when in Memory of Silence, I think we counted them at one time. I think there's some like 80 extra textual. There's speeches, there's poems, there's lullabies, there's an aria. There's not that many here, but still, we had to be careful. There was the Martí poem about Aragon. I think where is it? I have it here. It says, "Para Aragon en España, tengo yo en mi corazón un lugar todo Aragon, franco, fiero, sin saña." Well, you just can't slap that down, right? So I think it came out to be, "For Aragon in Spain, in heart I hold, Aragon the whole, frank, fierce, faithful, and sane." So you have to, at that point, we're not translating uva. We have to figure out what would Martí sound like in this novel. So there are things like that we might translate 4 or 5 pages quickly and then argue. We're still married. We'll argue about, no, that shouldn't be that way. I don't like that word, and we'd go through.
And we're still speaking.
We're still speaking. We keep doing this.
And there's 3 of us.
Yeah, right. Probably the biggest difference, now this will be the last thing I say and we'll move on. The biggest difference about translating this one versus Memory of Silence, Sudden Last One, is that this one wasn't finished. You had sent some initial things,
Oh, do you remember
and
that?
we would say, well, what's happening next? And we said, and we had just come from Vizcaya. We said, what about that place? That should be that should be in that novel.
It's a great
She said,
place for a murder.
Just
Yeah.
be quiet. Next thing we know, Vizcaya is the novel. Then there was there was one section where I think it's Patricio. No, it's Jack, who was accepted into a prestigious university. And I said, I got even if she doesn't know it, we've got to add here in Lexington, Virginia. So we unlike most times where translators don't even work with the author, right? Sometimes a translator works for the publisher. In this case,
Some
not
of the others
only
are dead.
yeah, right. We had close contact and would give her our thoughts. So that was what I would say about how this differs from others. To put it all in summary, the metaphor I always use with my students is that translation is like music. We all know that there's those notes on the page, right? You have to be faithful to those notes. You can't be changing the composition. But the way I'm going to interpret that piano piece, the way Emilio would interpret the piano, those sound very differently. So the way we play that music, the tone of it, the rhythm, the beauty, is going to be very different. But we can't change the composition of the music. So that's all. I'll leave it in that.
Thank you. I would think, Jeff, that these 2 novels were easier than The Memory of
Oh,
Silence.
boy.
The Memory of Silence took him 7 years.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And it may not be finished yet. Oh, here, it's right there. Put that one.
Here we are.
And then
Maybe I need to.
there.
I'll hold it.
Hold it on your
Yeah.
hand.
I hold it in my hand. I'll hold it in my hand. Okay. Well, I don't know because I have some papers here. The Memory of Silence was a difficult novel because, as he said, it had many poems, many. That might be better. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. I'm going to read a passage from chapter 2. After the body of a young woman, Sarah Turner, has appeared murdered in her apartment in a condominium building just around the corner here in Biltmore Way.
Be careful going home.
I'll tell you, it's like the David William apartment, but I took it off on advice of counsel in case it would get. I think it is in the Spanish version, but probably they won't read it in Spanish. Well, now a dog came in. Oh well, that's part of the mystery. The dog in the building.
Right, yeah, that's the counsel.
So it wasn't the David William because I had a friend that had an apartment there and I lived there for a couple months. So I usually write about things I know. So in the first chapter, they find the body, and then in this chapter, Maria and her partner Fernández, who's a character I'm very dear to me, are talking to the people who are gathered in the lobby, and they're asking questions. So this is Fernández talking to the people in the lobby. Detective Duquesne and I would be very grateful for your cooperation. We would like to speak with each of you individually. We'll take down your name, which apartment you live in. We'll ask you if you saw something over the weekend and your general impressions about Sarah Turner. We'll also like to tell us about any unusual incidents in the past that you might have seen. The smallest detail might be important. The first woman that came up to Maria was carrying a portable oxygen tank. She had clearly been a beautiful woman, and even at her current age, she still had a look of elegance about her. As soon as Maria took down her details, the neighbor began to speak. She was an angel. And to think at my age, with 2 kids and 4 grandchildren, nobody really takes care of me. But that woman, Sarah, she took me to the doctor once, and when she went shopping, she always asked me if I needed anything. I don't like to be a bother, but sometimes I would ask her for a loaf of bread or something I needed. She was a good person, and you could see she was from a good family. It's terrible what happened to her. The next woman had a somewhat different impression. She was a gorgeous woman, but a bit of a snob. She barely said hello to me when I ran into her. But now, with men, it was a totally different matter. It doesn't surprise me that something like that happened to her. I don't know what she did for a living. I suspect nothing respectable. The third neighbor wasn't any help at all. She only remarked, I can't tell you anything. I ran into her in the elevator once. She always seemed to be in a hurry. That's really all I can tell you. Meanwhile, Fernández gathered similar opinions that were of little benefit. One woman described Sarah Turner briefly. She looked very professional. She was always well-dressed but distant. She never attended the condominium association meetings. A Hispanic woman was more forthcoming. I sell Avon. Sometimes she would buy a few things from me, although I suspect they weren't for her. I'm sure she uses more expensive beauty products. When I would deliver her order and go to her apartment to collect the payment, she always invited me in. Her apartment was beautiful, very modern. I prefer more traditional, but regardless, I recognize good taste. She was nice. One time when I was out of breath, she insisted I sat down and she gave me some water and didn't let me leave until I was okay. Finally, one of the neighbors offered some interesting information. I live in the same floor. I'm not a gossip, but sometimes she had men over. That's natural in a case of a beautiful young woman who's single. No, I don't know if it always was the same man. But likewise, she also had female friends who would come by. Fernández made a note to bring a series of photos later to see if she would identify the visitors. The only man in the group was completely frank. She was beautiful. I'm an old man, but she was one of those women that regardless of how old you are, you can't help but notice her. She was polite, and she didn't make a big stink about it if you look at her. She ignored it. Believe me, if I had been 20 years younger, I would have a go at it. Although I don't know. She had a certain attitude about her of, look and don't touch, mírame y no me toques. That would stop anybody in their tracks. That's all I'm going to read for now. I picked a passage that doesn't give anything away.
Let's see if that's... Is this one working again? No? Okay, all right. We're translators, not actors, so we're going to do a dramatic reading, though, so bear with us. So this is from about 2/3 of the way in the novel, and Maria has just been informed by her boss that there's been a development in the case. I just got a call from the Broward County Police. I think you better head over there. I'll tell Fernandez to meet you once he's done.
What's happened?
I'm not sure. I know they've arrested a couple of employees from the funeral home. They want us to collaborate with them since the Esmeralda Reyes case is still pending, and our forensic department still has the limousine.
Although she had to pay attention to the traffic, which was getting worse in Miami every day, Maria took advantage of the drive over to think about things. She had 2 murders to solve, one of a white, educated, affluent woman who lived in a building in a fabulous neighborhood where she should have been safe. She probably knew her killer because there weren't any signs of forced entry into the apartment, and she was placed on the bed and even covered up. For the moment, there only appeared to be one missing painting signed by Goya, which she didn't believe to be worth too much on the market compared to those by other artists that weren't taken. Sarah Turner was expecting a baby, and since the very beginning, she had suspected that the father was some member of the Anderson family, given that if it belonged to the father or the son, a lot of money was involved. Now that the father had turned himself in, she had ruled him out because his version of events didn't line up with the facts. That very confession led her to believe that he was protecting someone in the family. However, even though she had interviewed each member of the family, her intuition had eliminated all of them. Who then had the motive to kill Sarah Turner?
Esmeralda Reyes, on the other hand, was a woman of limited means, a Nicaraguan who entered the country with false documentation after her visa to the United States had not been renewed, and who had transported drugs in balloons that she swallowed. One had exploded inside of her, and they cut open her stomach to remove the rest of the drugs. She had shown up at the Vizcaya Palace dressed in a costume from the 1920s, found lying in a position that Fernandez said resembled a scene from a silent film. To make things worse, Dr. Irwin reported that the cadaver had been kept on ice for several days and that it had been sexually violated post-mortem. She had heard about cases like this, but she had never investigated one. Nevertheless, she immediately thought about the funeral worker that Teodoro Luz had described, who was a little odd and who remained at work at night, alone and with the deceased. The only connection between the 2 murders was the work of art by the Spanish painter who had a fellowship in Vizcaya, and, for the moment, neither the artist nor the painting could be found. She was still a few minutes away from the Hollywood police station when her cell phone rang. She had requested information about Gregorio Alberto Ibarra and asked that they try to find him. The station informed her that he had flown to Spain 2 weeks ago, and that he was scheduled to return that afternoon. They sent his flight information, his photo, telephone number, and Miami address to her tablet. He didn't have a criminal record, at least not in the United States.
The number of people in the police station surprised Maria. Some were obviously federal agents. She recognized them immediately. Something big must be going on, she thought to herself. It seemed like they were waiting for her. The chief of police himself, Chris O'Donnell, a man about her own age who was as proud of his Irish roots as she was of her Cuban ones, and whom she had seen on a number of other occasions, took her to his office right away to get her up to speed.
So, the feds are working on a lead about a large drug operation. They've arrested 2 men at the Joseph Baker Funeral Home on Taft Avenue. They're also suspicious about some other irregularities at the funeral home. We're supposed to work on those, but they want us to keep it away from the press. They figure they had bigger fish to fry with the drug trafficking than the minor things at the funeral home, and they don't want the big cats to get wind of it and take off. I know you've been over there, and granted, you could have given me a heads up, but I'm not going to make a big deal of it now that we need to work together. In addition to one of the funeral home limousines being implicated in the murder that you're investigating, maybe it was also involved in transporting drugs, too. The feds don't want any information leaking out about the matter, and they want us to leave it to them. Still, we're supposed to interrogate the 2 suspects. I'll let you take the lead chair since the murder is the primary issue for the moment.
Thanks. What are their names?
Peter Raymond and Ted Light. Which one do you want to see first?
The light that leads is the one that shines. Since she uttered this particular phrase in Spanish, O'Donnell didn't understand her play on words. First had light, she explained.
As soon as she entered the interrogation room, Teodoro's loose face lit up. He couldn't stop talking. Ay, señorita, please tell them I didn't have anything to do with this.
Sit down, Teodoro, she told him in English in a severe tone. I don't think that you were being completely honest with me the other day and that you've seen a lot more things.
Teodoro remained quiet.
You know that the first one who talks gets the better deal. If you cooperate, I can see to it that you don't come out badly in this mess you've gotten yourself into. But you have to tell me everything and tell me now.
The man continued to be silent.
As an accomplice to murder, you're looking at spending a lot of years behind bars. The detective stood up and headed toward the door.
Wait. I'll tell you everything. But I don't want to go to prison. Promise me that...
I can't promise you anything until you tell us something first. The only thing that I can say is that they will treat you as fairly as possible.
Look, I didn't do anything wrong. They only gave me money, and I looked the other way. That's all. And I nearly told you the other day because I was starting to get nervous. There were a lot of things.
So, Teodoro, did they hide drugs at the funeral home?
Yes, but I don't know what type or any other details. I think they bring them in at the crack of dawn, and Peter keeps an eye on them. They take them out little by little as they sell them.
And where does Peter keep them?
In plain sight, in one of the coffins. It's one of the cheapest ones, and no one would buy it. It's in the basement.
Do you know the names or any details about the people who brought in or took out the drugs?
No. Well, one time, without meaning to, because believe me, the less I know, the better. I caught a glimpse of one of them, but fortunately, he didn't realize it.
What do you look like?
How can I tell you? Normal. I just saw him for a few seconds.
And what else is going on at the funeral home, Teodoro? What's going on with the bodies?
Look, I don't know how many times it's happened. I've only seen it twice. They've brought in dead women to Peter, and he buries them. He cremates them. He makes them disappear.
Maria thought it was an implausible way of getting rid of a cadaver. When was that?
First instance was a long time ago. The other was barely a few days ago. That's all I know. I swear it.
Something made Maria push harder. I think you're still hiding something, so tell me, because if you don't, there's no deal. Teodoro shuffled restlessly in his chair.
Look, I'm ashamed. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I should have told you when you came to the funeral home.
Well, tell me now.
Well, it was a few nights ago. It was already late, but there was an early service the next morning, and I went downstairs to make sure that Peter had prepared the body properly. And oddly, he hadn't locked the door like he usually does. And when I entered the room, I almost died.
What did you see, Teodoro?
You're not going to believe it. I saw Peter up on the table having sex with a dead woman. That's it.
Sometimes when I read or I hear them read this novel, I don't find myself. I usually write a lot of things that come from within, from experiences that I've had, and somehow I think writing is something mysterious. Things are inside you, and by some mysterious way they come out when you're writing. But these things are weird. And the only thing I can think of is when I'm writing detective novels, I always read the police reports. So sometimes I read something in a police report, and it might be a short paragraph and I might make a whole big story out of it, but the origin is in that police report. And since it's not something that I lived or it's been inside me for a long time, then when I see it, I say, where did I get this from? I have no idea where it came from. This novel has so many twists and turns that sometimes I read it like somebody else wrote it. Well, I'm going to read a very short passage. This is previous to their chapter, when they've gone to the funeral home because of the limousine that they've seen that a woman gets on it and then she appears dead. And so there's a dialogue with Ted Light, and it's becoming a little tense. I'm just going to read a very brief passage. So Fernandez tells him, "Is your name really Mr. Light?" Fernandez abruptly asked him in Spanish,
No, mijo, yo me llamo Teodoro Luz. No, young man, my name is Teodoro Luz. My paternal grandfather used to say that we were descendants of José de la Luz y Caballero. You know who that is, right? Of course, the great 19th century professor and Cuban intellectual. Fernández immediately replied. Fernández knows a lot about Cuba. Yes, an illustrious last name, but for American, it's easier just to go by Ted Light. I always tell them that I hope I can be a light for them in these difficult moments. You know, you have to do what it takes to make a living. To an extent, the tension was lifted. Look, Teodoro, the car was seen this past Tuesday in Miami. It was used to kidnap a woman, and later she was found dead. This can be, no puede ser, Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre. Deep inside, Maria was amused and thought, these Cubans, always invoking a saint or a virgin. Thank you. And now I hope you have a lot of questions.
You know, as I was listening to you reading, I was thinking, and you are involved in this business. What about audiobooks? Because it almost looks like this book would be a very, and of course you could be the characters because you could do it. And I don't know if that is very expensive and what the market is, etc.
I think that there's something we would like to look into because Jeff would like to do an audiobook. The Miracles in Lazarus was published by a company called Mango. I was a tease that I was gonna make an announcement of somebody with a fruit name or something, and it was before it came out. And they did an audiobook without asking me or anything. But this one, we have all the rights, so we should look into it. I think we would look into that.
Because of the traffic.
Because it just.
A lot of people have time.
I know. One of my grandsons does. My son-in-law does. They listen to audiobooks. Yeah. So thank you. We'll look into that.
I would like to ask you a question. When you started writing these mysteries, did you have a basic idea of the infrastructure of the mystery? Because, you know, I've read many mysteries and I watch mysteries all the time. And for instance, there's one on TV that they show a lot, which is, you know, Murder in Paradise. And they always have situations that are totally impossible to believe that the person committed the crime, that any person that was present committed the crime. And they usually don't go beyond 4 or 5 people. So they have to, you know, figure out in their script how to, in 1 hour, solve that problem of who is the person that cannot be because there's no way that they did it. Whereas Agatha Christie is more complicated. I've read more of her and everything. And of course, in her case, she always has these luxurious places and weird situations. And what I figured out is that she always has a story. The story is not the murder. The murder, it's almost always because of money. And it's almost always a poison.
Well, Olga, when I started The Miracle of St. Lazarus, which is a cold case of a child that has been missing for several years. And I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea. She was missing with her father, and the father was supposedly, was dead because they get him out of a car that in the canal. So but the baby's missing, so they don't know if the baby was saved or not. They never found her. I had no idea what was going to happen, and with this one, I didn't know who was going to be the assassin. I figured if I didn't know, I could give it away. So I made everybody possible. Everybody had a motive. With Sarah Turner, that there's a whole Anderson family. When you read it, you'll see that everybody would have had a motive. So I suspected of everybody. And at the end, I made a decision who was going to be the murderer. But To be honest, they've been the most. I don't think they're my best work. I have to announce that I have another book coming out. This year has been my 80th birthday, and on the year of my 80th birthday, I've published 2 books. This one, and a novel in Spanish that's called De Amores y Guerra, Cuba y España, and we're going to present it here at Books and Books on January 24th. I didn't want to do it sooner, even though it just came out, because I can't abuse of you reading 2 books or coming, so quickly for another book presentation. So these 2 books have been a lot of fun to write. I always usually have a plan ahead. With Memory of Silence, I had even pictures and horoscopes of the characters and birthdays, because it goes through 40 years, so I had to see how old they were at different periods. This one, I went rogue. I went, and something that helped me a lot was the internet, because, for example, at some point, she and Fernández go to Tampa. I think it was in the first novel, and I wanted them to go to a restaurant, so I looked up a Cuban-American restaurant, and I found, what's the name? Colombia. And I described Colombia and the menu and the food and everything else. And it's one of his favorite restaurants, and he said I had done it because it was his favorite restaurant. I've never been to Colombia. I just recommended it to my daughter, and she was just there, but I'd never been there. At another point, they go to New York, so they go to see this character. I decided he lives in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. I found on 5th Street a place where they have breakfast. I saw the place, I describe it, I look at the menu, everything. And without leaving my office, which is very good since I broke my leg and I can't travel as much as I like. So they've been fun. I don't know if they're good or not, but I think they're easy read. I think they're fun to read. I think they engage you and you can read them quickly. And the other ones are more serious work.
I think you have a very effective flow from the first detective novel to this one. There's just enough nuggets left over from that refer back to the first one for the person who has read the first one and is missing those characters and they want more Maria, more Fernández. But you could pick up this one without having read the first one, and it still reads very well.
I wanted to add, and of course you're talking about Agatha Christie. One of the things that aggravates all of us, right, about Agatha Christie is when she introduces a character on the next to last chapter, and that's the person who did it. It's like, we can't figure out who did it if you don't tell us from the beginning. And we were just talking about this today. I think Uva does a good job with, there's not that, as we were talking about the other night, this ding-dong moment. There's not this surprise where, I didn't know that they were twins. I didn't know that what. So there's not that dramatic surprise that Agatha Christie and many withhold, right? So as you read the novel, this would be as if you were getting real-life information as you're going through. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is that this seems to be a much more realistic approach of discovery of who did it versus the Agatha Christie dramatic irony surprise.
I think it's a modern, detective novel. All the novels that I read gave me that background.
That is friendlier to the reader.
Yeah, and it's less formulaic too. Yeah, less formulaic.
It's believable.
Right.
I think if it was Agatha Christie, as great as she's to read, there's a lot of that. No way, this couldn't happen. With this one,
you know what it means to be compared favorably to Agatha Christie. I've grown up. I'm taller today. Yes, Jorge, and then you.
How do you see the relationship between Mario Conde and María Duquesne, other than their names?
Well, one's a male detective in Havana, one is a female detective in Miami. Actually, I'm gonna read you the very end of this one. I don't see very well, but I can read the end. She has solved the cases, and she is have celebrated with her family, and she's with her boyfriend, and and she gets a phone call, and it's from her boss. The sound of her cell phone interrupted a moment when she felt genuinely happy. She was surprised to see Kepler's name in the screen. Kepler is her boss. Marita, I'm sorry to bother you. You deserve a few days off, but what's the matter? There's been a murder. Maria got out of bed. Does it have anything to do with the other cases? No, I don't think so, not in the least. Where was it? Do you want me to go over to the scene? Not this moment, tomorrow. Your passport is up to date, right? Yes, why? A Florida resident has been murdered in Cuba, and I need you in Havana tomorrow without delay. But? No but. About it. Mario Conde will be waiting for you at Jose Marti International Airport. But I've already told you before, Mario Conde is a literary character. Oh, how would I know that, Maria? I've never understand that country in a million years, but there's no other alternative. You're leaving for Cuba tomorrow. So now I've got to take Maria to Cuba. Yes.
Just a brief commentary to reinforce the value of a good translation. The Spanish author Javier Barillas, who died recently, very famous.
Yes.
They asked him, what accomplishment are you most proud of in all the books that you've written? And he said, actually, what I'm most proud of is the translations that I've done, because it is much more complicated to do a good translation than to write a book, because there's so many ways to try to get into the head of the author and understand various ways of expressing it and the language, and I keep changing and adapting it, and that is one of the most complicated things to be done. So
Thank you.
congratulations
Thank you.
on your job.
Thank you.
They do a wonderful job, and it's given my work a new dimension. The memory of silence is taught at several universities, and even, for example, this semester is being taught in Spanish in 2 universities, but I don't think if it had not come out in English that it would have gotten to the academic world. It's the way it is. We are in the United States, and this is a university. One is in Georgia, and the other one, I think, in California. Yeah, because they wanted me to do Zoom, but it was like 6 o'clock my time or something.
Can I add to one of the greatest translators of all time was Gregory Rabassa, right? Who translated all that we would know about the boom if it would not been for Rabassa. So he would translate works simultaneously. Well, he was translating Julio Cortázar's Hopscotch, and there's a section there where it talks about a fried egg, and Rabassa did all of his translations on a typewriter, and it was just a simple miskey, and it went from fried egg to fired egg. And Cortázar looked at it and said, "What is it?" He said, "Oh, wait a minute. I love it. Just keep it like that." So if you look at the English, it actually says fired egg, and in the Spanish, it says huevo frito. But Rabassa said, Cortázar said, "I love this. It will make them wonder what this is all about." So sometimes the translations take a life even beyond the translator as well.
I remember with Memory of Silence, sometimes he would write to me, email me, and ask me, for example, ¿qué cosa era una Pamela?
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
and I would, well, it's a hat, and then I would have to look for a drawing of the hat and send him a drawing so he would understand, because I didn't know how to say it either. So we had a lot.
And that was, and Google Images was coming out, and that helped a lot. But the first chapter on Memory of Silence, I did start on chapter 1. And we had not been coming to Miami at that point, so much of the great food here, I didn't know. So I started on that chapter where she's come back from Ohio and is nostalgically going over all the great food, and I'd say, "What? Pero una medianoche? ¿Qué es una medianoche?" And so I had to, then of course, going back to the audience, I had to put that in and say, "and other sandwiches." So, these are things that again, are difficult for translation.
You brought up La Padula and with the tragedy that Cuba is going through. I think he recently said we have no food, we have no gas, we have no light, but the least thing we have is hope.
Yeah, what's going in Cuba is absolutely very, very sad. There's a question there?
Yeah, yes, it was talking about Padura and Montalban. They have created like a political background for their novels. I wonder if you have had this temptation of writing about a mystery novel on a political setting or background? Something that came to your mind?
Well, not a mystery. These two novels take place in Miami, and I think what you would find, especially in the first one, is, I mean, you can, I've been here since I was 15 and I've turned 80, but exile is still in me. And there's a Spaniard exiled, and there is a girl from Haiti, and there's the Cubans that are that came from Pinal del Rio. And so there are different characters in the novel that in Miami that are all in exile. In this one, there are more Americans. But I guess that's what my political life is exile. It's not, I don't live in Cuba. I've gone to Cuba, I shot for Cuba, but it's not my reality, my everyday reality. And I like to write about things I know well. It doesn't mean that I might not write a third one and make Maria go to Havana, but I have an idea that's going to be a short trip. She's going to come back pretty quickly. Because I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I've got to enjoy, you know.
It will be dark.
Yeah. Well, depends, because if she goes after this, then I have to set it up like in 2000, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. So había apagones entonces también. We'll see. I don't know. I can't.
Regarding the
At least.
translations, I'm always amazed. I like to go to the opera, and I don't know if you do any of that kind of translation, but it is amazing to me, like the opera is in Italian or it's French or whatever language, and then they always translate to English and Spanish. And it is quite accurate of what they're saying, even though some things may be you know, not understandable to other people from other countries or other cultures.
Right.
But they try to do it, and it always amazes me what a good job they do.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and you recognize it when it's good, like I say that, but you'd say, what I just heard, then that's
it's
not
very much needed.
Right,
It's very much
right.
needed for the audience.
right. Absolutely.
So you've been talking about translation, and a lot of it, what I'm hearing about is really more interpretation, right, rather than translation, which I think about as literal.
Yeah.
Arroz con mango would be a mess,
Right.
right? But in English, you translate it to rice and mango. So all that is a setting where I've always thought separately about
Right.
it. I was a translator in a hospital for a while, and there was a lot of arroz con mango there, for sure.
Right.
But and it was, I could, you know, I could always have to think, and sometimes it was hard. What does it really mean? What's the intention of the words?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about translations. So that's what we gain out of it, right? Sometimes a word that you've used,
Or interpretation?
on the translation, well, I'll go back a second. We know that interpretation, if it's oral, is a complete, I don't know how people could possibly do it at the UN. I mean, oral simultaneous interpretation, I'm amazed by those people. I don't know how their brain works. But we tend to talk about, that's how wars get started. But we tend to talk about a difference between translation and transliteration, right? That transliteration, again, you know it when it's there, and you think, that's so funny. That's not, that is word for word. That's Google translation, right? That's the transliteration. It just comes out comical. But the translation, a lot of times we talk about, well, I think it was Günter Grass that said a translated work is a work that is a brand new, old original, right? Where you've taken it, you've interpreted it, you brought it inside of you, and it better come back out the exact same way. But of course, it can't be, right? So, I mean, I'm sort of talking in circles, but we hope that we never interpret, meaning giving anything away, but we also hope that we don't transliterate, because that becomes comical, right? So there's that happy medium in there where you have to take it, ingest it, and let it come back out the same, but in a different. That's why I was talking about notes and music.
And you have to get the tone and the innuendo.
Right.
There's certain subtleties there
Right.
that Uva's included, and we have to figure out how are we going to get that point across.
Just in perusing, I don't see any footnotes. So I presume that the better the translation is, the less need for footnotes to
You will
explain.
have a footnote in a novel. That would
Well,
be a no-no.
And that's the
Well,
right.
for a phrase
Right.
or something.
In Memory of Silence, first of all, I don't think that these would require, but in Memory of Silence, there was a lot of information that the reader would like to have, right? And the publisher said, no footnotes, obviously. So there were times when I would have to add a parenthetical subordinate clause or a parenthetical phrase to go back to what I said a second ago about medianoches, where I said, she came and bought a bunch of medianoches and other sandwiches. Well, if you look at the original, and other sandwiches is not there. So I think it scared Uva when she first got my copy and her copy. She said, yours is about 12 pages longer. Why is that? It's like, well, there's extra stuff that we... So, but now rather than having notes, then your parenthetical idea, it becomes your best
And
friend.
in the Memory
there.
of Silence, we also had at the end a
Glossary.
glossary.
Yeah.
Certain words. We had a
Right.
glossary.
But that became really difficult with El Libro de Abastamientos, and that's where we had to do some explaining
Yeah.
inside the text.
Una libreta.
Yeah.
But in that regard, Memoria was different. I mean, there
Memoria
were a
was
lot
a
of
very
cultural and
difficult
historical
novel
pieces
to
that
translate.
needed some type of explanation. This one, I don't think that you would need it.
And you also have to, again, if it's not explained in the original, we have to withhold, or then we're getting to this thing of we're overstepping what we get to do. We're at that point we are interpreting versus translating.
It's funny. I can relate to translations in a different kind of way. My wife is Cuban. I'm from Spain, so obviously we are supposed to speak the same language. Every day she comes up with some phrase, and I kind of look at her, and she's, una frase cubana, dicho cubano.
Sí, cubanismo.
So that comes up constantly, so I have to be doing some translation constantly, but yeah, it's fun.
Many of those I would have to write Uva and say, mira, there must have been 20.
En el tibiritábara. What does this mean?
Yeah. And I would usually guess and say, it means this, right? It's like, not even close. No, not even. Right.
Yeah, especially the other one has a lot of Cuban sayings. Yeah, this one not as much.
Tell them this
Uva,
is
for your
the
character of
word of the
Maria.
day. Every day I teach them a new word.
Excuse me, yes?
For your character of Maria, you said that you modeled it after your daughter?
Well, it has...
Or was it a young Uva?
No.
If it was not a young Uva, what's this similar?
I took things that were happening. For example, I think in one of the chapters, Maria is taking, actually at the beginning, is taking a spinning lesson in a bike that Uva used to do. Then her son goes to Gainesville as Christina's son. Well, all of them were at Gainesville at some point, but he graduated from Gainesville, from UF. And so, you know.
I mean, as far as traits of the character.
Well, I don't think, really, I think Maria is not after me. Or, for example, I think that some of the characters of Memory of Silence had a little bit more of myself, biographically, not everything, but some of it, and some in the character. But this is more like the generation, you know, be able to work, have family, that kind of thing of their generation, of my daughters. I've gone through the same thing, but not now. So I was thinking more of them when I was writing it, because it's like they're older and the characters are very active. They can't be me. I can't do what Maria does. They can. My daughters can. Thank you. Well, you've been a very great audience. I thank you very much for coming, and I'll be happy to sign books.
Thank you. What's that? Oh, do you? Every time we would walk from the Biltmore Hotel up to here, and every time we'd be on Biltmore Way, we'd say,